Well, hey there friends, Nicholas here. I wanted to take some time today to walk you through my process for creating comics digitally. Today we're going to walk through all the way from the ideation and thumbnail phase to line drawings, color comps, coloring, and final. Now I realize that everybody has their own approach to making comics, or art in general, but this is mine and what's worked for me. I like to start all of my comics or illustrations with a rough. This gives me a basic idea of what the layout's going to be without getting too heavy into details. My approach is to start mostly with large shapes. Even when it comes to drawing people, I want to get the basic shape of that person down first. So as you can see, I'm drawing these soldiers pretty roughly and focusing on their shapes. Now, as I begin to draw Saul and David, you notice that I just changed the size of David considerably. And that's one of the great things about drawing digitally is that you can just move and scale things around without having to erase them. As you can see, the characters are still very, very rough. There's not a lot of detail right now because I just want to get the basic layout. I'll probably say this 100 times as we're working on this video that I like to work all over. I don't want to get too focused on one area at a time. As I was working on the layout, I realized that I wanted a horizontal version of this panel. And so I went ahead and reoriented everything, but I used my original drawings. But I am having to supplement a few panels here to get the entire layout to work as a whole. As you can see, I was just able to flip and move David around, change his orientation depending on what is needed. Throughout this piece, you will see me redraw over and over as I'm refining. I'll probably draw this maybe 3 or 4 times total. What you will quickly notice is that it's not a very linear process. As I just finish up the basic rough, instead of doing a finalized drawing, I'm actually going to go ahead and start laying down some value of the piece. I want to get an overall feeling of how this piece will work in the value scale. This helps me understand a little bit better the storytelling and the flow of the overall piece without getting too bogged down in some of the details. With just a little bit of value, you can see that the piece is really starting to come together as a whole. I even start to add a few glow effects just for some candy. I'm going to add a white transparent layer so that I can begin the final line drawings. As you can see, I quickly do not like my initial drawing, my initial pass, and so I go just erase everything and start over. Artists are drawn to certain aspects of art making, and mine is certainly drawing. This is where I think I get the most satisfaction. I love it so much to put line work down. When drawing, you take all that you know about art into individual little strokes and little lines. We're talking about anatomy, shape, composition. There can be so much expression in individual lines. As you can see, I'm still not working from right to left or left to right or anything like that. I'm working all over the piece so that I can work on it as a whole, not individual cells. The reason for this is that I may notice some problems that I didn't see before if I work on it as a whole rather than individually. Even though I'm not done with my line drawing, I thought it would be beneficial to start laying in some color. Color adds emotion and life to your piece. And this is a color comp, which means it's a really rough idea of what the colors will look like. Certainly not a final, but it does give you a sense of how the piece will read as a whole. Here I'm also experimenting with the dividers and, do I want thick lines? Do I want them to be organic? And now I'm back to doing more line work. Individually rendering people so that I can come back and start laying down my flats. But for now, we'll do my favorite part, and that's the drawing. As I look back at creating this piece, I realized that the proportions on Saul are completely wrong. As you can see, I'm struggling with it. I draw it many times, and I still don't get it right at the end. So I just move on. Sometimes you have to know when to move on. This particular panel is especially difficult. It probably would have been helpful to get some sort of reference for it rather than just kind of going from my head, as the angle is strange and the perspective is odd, but it's helpful nevertheless to just keep going. It's time to lay in some flats. Now these flats are a flat layer of color on its own layer that basically outlines the character or object so that I can draw or paint on it individually and separate from the background. Sometimes I use different colors for flats just to help organize my piece. As I continue to paint on both the characters and the backgrounds, I'm able to select either just the character or paint behind the characters on the background. This makes the illustration process much faster, that I'm not having to worry about painting around objects. I can simply paint directly behind them. Laying down a flat doesn't take much time, but it's so worth it in the end to be able to paint behind objects without having to worry about messing up your line work or brush work. Saves lots of time. Do your flats. Now, the ability to flip your canvas or mirror your canvas is one of the most important techniques that's been used for generations of artists. Artists forever have held their work up into a mirror, and this allows you to see your piece with new eyes. You can see problems that you didn't see before. Now, I probably should have done this before I got so far in the piece, as I can see major problems that would take a lot more time to fix than if I would have done this earlier. So it's a great idea to flip your canvas often and just work one way, flip it, do it again. Since I'm working in Procreate, this is super easy and doesn't take much time at all. Photoshop does this really well as well. As we are nearing the end of this piece, I'm continuing to work all over, enjoying painting figures, the background as a whole. I believe this setup is a testimony to good process. You make the most of your time, you're efficient with your time, and you don't have to go back and forth working on things over and over again. Process has been used for generation upon generation of artists, and you should find one that works for you. Embrace the process and make better art. I really hope that you enjoyed this process today, and if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video.